Hey, welcome, seekers, to another enlightening episode of the Nomads of the Noetic podcast. I'm Dr. Trace Pirtle, and joining me is my esteemed co-host, Dr. Randy Brown. Together, we journey into consciousness, philosophy, and the wonders of the wandering mind. Hey, welcome, everybody. Today, we are on episode number 6, the Nomads of the Noetic podcast. And today, Randy and I are going to be talking about something that I think is going to be pretty interesting. It would clearly qualify as a coffee shop kind of discussion, and we hope that you all enjoy it as well. And I'd like to see some of your comments as well as we're going through. So today, Randy, we're going to be talking about right speech. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yep. And we're going to be looking at it sort of through 3 different lenses. One of them kind of through the law of attraction, another one through Stoicism, and then also through Buddhism. Correct?
Yes, I think that over the past couple of weeks, we've kind of touched on right speech, for lack of a better term. I can't, or speaking anyway, in a couple of podcasts, and it's something that I've been thinking about, and I think you've thought about too as we've been talking. And as I've been thinking about this over the past week and couple of weeks, it's really interesting when you think about speech and what that means, or speaking and what that means. It's not just speaking to other people. It's speaking to yourself. That would be one way that happens. It's also writing. If you're writing a blog post, you're writing emails. It's texting. And I think that may be something that we do need to have some focus on. I know that young people are better at texting than I am, likely. But I wonder if that shorthand that they use for texting is not, does not, I wonder if it has a cautionary tale that it could tell. Because sometimes in the terseness of a spoken word or written word, things can easily be misunderstood. So I just think that this idea of speaking is really interesting, and thinking about ways that we can monitor it ourselves, and thinking about rules or ideas that should guide us will be an interesting conversation.
Right. And, just along that lines, especially of texting, there appears to be a different etiquette that surrounds texting as a form of communication and of right speech, or speaking rightly, but it's different from what I'm used to. So if I'm part of the boomer generation, and so are you, part of right speech in any kind of a conversation or any kind of a dialogue is if I say something, you respond, you say something, I respond. And then if the conversation is over, there's some kind of an agreement that the conversation's over, right?
Right.
That's it. Hey, I'll see you later. See you later. Well, what I notice many times with text these days, even with my own family members, is I'll put something out there that appears to be a question. Now, if I don't put a question mark at the end of it, I guarantee you about a 90% certainty I'm not going to get anything back.
Right.
So I don't know how to interpret that, in terms of right speech. I'm expecting some kind of response, even if it's yes, no, something closed in. But to get nothing, you're left wondering, well, are they just totally disinterested? Or do they not care? And so you get all of this internal dialogue that goes on. And then it goes back to what you're saying about our own self speech.
Right.
What do we tell ourselves as a result of that kind of interaction? It may not be true, but that's the internal dialogue.
That's correct. Because sometimes not responding is speaking.
It sure is.
and sometimes it's just not responding.
Right. True. Yeah.
So yeah, it
Yeah. Hey,
becomes really difficult.
yeah, exactly. Do you know that I sent you a text message that you didn't respond to me about? Do you know that?
You likely did.
Right. Yeah.
Not too long ago, a friend of mine said to me, he said, "You want to know one of the things I like about you?" And I said, "What is that?" He said, "You don't respond to your messages right away." And I said, "Well, that's interesting, and I'm not sure how that makes me a good friend." And he said, "Well," he said, "because obviously you are more interested in people that are present in your life and things that are present in your life than you are in your telephone." And I
Right.
thought, well, that's one way to look at it, but I'm not sure everyone would look at it that way.
Yeah,
So that's putting a positive spin on
that is
somebody
a
not
positive
responding.
reframe. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a reframe right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so I've tried actually to pay attention now since then when he has texted me to text back. And I'm not sure that's the right response even to that discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now he thinks I don't have anything to do. So,
Right. Yeah. It is kind of interesting psychology on that reframe because it almost sets the person up then for going along with, with what uh, what the desired response is. Hey, you were probably spending that time with someone more important. That's the insinuation, right?
yes,
Um, so, so there is a little bit of that. There's almost a guilt factor in it. It's like, oh man, I don't want that person to feel like they're unimportant. Yes, family, friends, the other ones that I'm dealing with, they're important, but they're important as well.
yeah,
So, so it kind of shapes behavior a little bit in that direction of, okay, I'll be a little more aware when I need to respond back to that person.
right.
Hey, I've got something here for you. You and I have always been big into if we're going to talk about some kind of a term like right speech, right? It's good to have an operational definition so we know that we're on the same page with what we're talking about. Because we'll talk about it from, the law of attraction and Stoicism, Buddhism, but just in terms of right speech, I was thinking about that and so I'm developing a little bit of learned helplessness. So if I'm thinking about something, I'll go ahead and ask Chat GPT, right?
Of course.
Hey, let's do a prompt here, right? And then we'll come up with an operational definition for right speech. And here's what it came up with, and we'll see if we agree with this or if we disagree, and how consistent it is with these other three lenses that we'll look at. So Chat GPT 4.0 says right speech is the practice of speaking truthfully, kindly, and beneficially while avoiding falsehood, harmful language, and frivolous talk.
That's it's that aligns really well with what the Buddha is reported to have said according to the Pali Canon. Now he didn't say frivolous,
Okay.
but he used a word that was um, probably close to that. Maybe mindless chatter
Yeah. Okay.
would be a better term for it.
I like
Uh,
that too. Yeah.
but obviously, the first part, the the part about it, truthfulness is an absolute in the Buddhist tradition.
Mhm.
So whatever one speaks, it needs to be truthful.
As well
Um,
as it is from Stoicism.
that's right, exactly. That in that
Stoics
way, those
completely
two
agree. Yep.
theories or theorists or philosophies agree. The Buddhist tradition, the second thing might be that it needs to be reliable,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, which in is only subtly different. However, there are many things that are true that are not necessary and they're not necessarily reliable.
Right.
because they
Right.
may only be true at the moment. Like, for instance, we don't go outside and walk because we might step on creatures that are living. Well, that is not reliable because you would only take that position during the rainy season if you were a Buddhist.
Okay.
So that is not a reliable statement. It'd only be reliable for a period of time during monsoon or whatever that was. So it might
Right.
be a way to think about it.
And it's also culturally constrained,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
We don't have monsoon in Texas, but
Yeah.
we have it in, well, we have it in way east Texas,
Right.
but we have it in Arizona.
Yeah. Well, and even looking at the news yesterday, of course they were covering the flooding in Florida, and they were saying, hey, look,
Yes.
you don't want to be getting out of your car and stuff because you're walking through areas that's part of Alligator Alley. Okay.
That's
You
right.
use some sense, folks, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there are some there's cultural constraints, and where it may apply in one culture, it doesn't in another.
Right.
Okay.
Another thing that is also implied in that statement, even with AI, is that your speech needs to be worthy of confidence.
Right.
So, in other words, when you say it, that's similar to reliability,
Yeah.
but it needs to be worthy of confidence. I think there's some things that a person has to do before their speech is actually worthy of that.
Yeah.
But that was part of what of his intention about speech. But I think he gave instructions later about how to make sure that your speech will be worthy of confidence. So I think that from the Buddhist tradition, uh, it that AI agrees.
Yeah.
Now that may be partially because AI was looking for the term right speech. Now in the Pali Canon, right speech was in Sanskrit. It's known as samavaka. So
Okay.
that's the best translation of samavaka is right speech.
Speech.
So Mr. AI probably just went in there and probably pulled directly from and summarized,
Right.
hopefully,
Right.
from that tradition and didn't consider Stoicism because it may not have had the same connotations.
Yeah. And
Uh,
the way just in my understanding, Stoicism really does talk about, that the value of speaking truthfully, but it's also about speaking rationally, right? So the truthfulness relates to how rational or irrational is our speech. And so we do that with, I always talk about right thought, right mind, right heart, right spirit. And as long as we do that, if that's what the intention is, we can't control how it's perceived by the other person, the receiver, right? All we
right.
have is just what we're putting out there. So let me throw out for example, and maybe we can look at it through these different lenses and compare it with this operational definition. So here's a scenario. We got people right now. In fact, I talked with one who identifies as a squirrel. Okay, identifies as a squirrel, and we're not talking about a lot of times with Native American culture, there can be spirit animals.
Right.
My spirit animal is a whatever. My spirit animal, let's say they are saying is a squirrel. No, they are identifying I'm a squirrel, and I want to be treated as such. So in terms of right speech that's not harmful, if we're trying to follow the definition here, speaking truthfully, kindly, beneficially, avoiding falsehood, avoiding harmful language and frivolous talk. In your mind, from a Buddhist perspective, let's say, How does that square the truthfulness of the reality is you are not a squirrel, right? With the empathy of kind of understand what must it be like for a person to actually identify as a squirrel, not a human being.
Right. Yeah, you're in a quandary in this one because if your speech has to follow those guidelines of being truthful, um, being kind, and I think where I get stopped is when is it necessary for me to tell that person they're not a squirrel?
Okay.
Well, that would depend on the situation.
Okay, so I'll give you the extension of it. So if we have, let's say, the conversation um, stops at, um, uh, well, I mean, you can identify yourself as a squirrel, no problem. I'll respect, your perceptions of what you identify with. But then if it comes back as I expect you to respond to me as if I'm a squirrel, okay? That's where it changes the dynamics. And for me, and this is what I think is happening many times in mental health settings right now, is the more that we affirm someone's perceptions of who they are, it's one thing to respect the differences. Well, I respectfully disagree with you. I still see you as a human being, not as a squirrel. You want to identify that way, fine. But when then we get in and we over identify with the person because we don't want to quote unquote hurt them, right? If a person identifies as a squirrel, it's going to be much easier for me to hurt them than if they identify as their spirit animal as a buffalo, right? Or
Right.
as a tiger or as an eagle. There's strength. In fact, I looked that up. The top spirit animals. You know what's number one? It's the wolf.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to hurt any wolf's feelings.
No.
The second is a bear. Again, a bear is much more stoic in their approach. A wolf is much more stoic.
That's right.
The eagle, same thing, right?
Yes.
Strength and resilience, the owl, wisdom, and so on. But then once you start getting down the list, you get into squirrels, you get into deer, and if we as a culture are maybe not being truthful to our own belief system and what we would call reality, are we actually doing more harm than we are good?
Let me give you a quote from a quote that is suggested to be from the Buddha,
Yeah.
from the Pali Canon. And he's talking about right speech, and I want you to apply that to the scenario you gave me.
Yep.
He says, the person who practices right speech, quote, he speaks truth. He's devoted to the truth, reliable, worthy of confidence. He is not a deceiver of men. Thus, he never knowingly speaks a lie, neither for the sake of his own advantage, nor for the sake of another person's advantage,
Yeah.
nor for the sake of any advantage whatsoever.
Yeah.
Now, that's hard to me, it's hard to take that philosophy from Buddhist tradition and then say that if I'm forced into a situation where I have to acknowledge the squirrel or tell the squirrel they're a squirrel or tell someone else they're a squirrel,
Yeah.
that becomes a very difficult situation for me because I then have to lie for someone else's advantage
Yeah. Right.
or protection. Uh, I and so I'm not sure that to fit within that philosophy that I can speak to the subject.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I may have to not speak
Right.
to the issue. if I'm going to hold true and strict to that value. Now, I'm not saying or advocating that that's what a person should do or has to do in that situation. I'm just saying if you're going to be consistent and hold a view
Yeah.
of Buddhism when it comes to right speech, you can't place yourself in that situation and then simply say, well, yes, they're a squirrel, because you violate then that tenet automatically, unless you yourself believe they're a squirrel.
Right.
Now,
Right.
you can hold that position too. And if you honestly believe that, okay, then you can say that. But if by fact they're not a squirrel, even if you believe it,
Yeah.
you haven't violated that for yourself. But the thing that you've violated is you will not be worthy of confidence.
Right.
And see,
Yeah.
I actually think the Buddhist plan of right speech is quite brilliant.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because I think he or they proposed it in such a way that when a person finds themselves in a time of need to actually speak the truth with force, that they've built this plan for themselves and they've practiced this in this way so that in those times they will be able to speak and people will listen.
Right.
So if you're going around and you're believing they're a squirrel and that's what you're saying, then you've already wiped out confidence. So then later on, then nobody's going to listen.
Right.
You will not have the power of that speech then.
Yeah.
So either you don't speak, that's your only out. But if you don't believe that the squirrel's a squirrel, you may have to just say that. If you're pushed to that situation, it depends on where you are. But you gave me a situation where there's two people,
Right.
it's you and the squirrel.
Yep.
Well, I can't lie for their benefit, but I don't have to speak to the issue with them.
Yeah.
That I don't have to do. So, and I do think you're right. It seems like to me that uh, when we give in to certain issues, we're not helping someone.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm not even criticizing the fact that somebody wants to be that squirrel.
Not the issue. Right.
I
Right.
don't, that is not the issue, but to not acknowledge
Yeah.
that at least that's different, that at least that is not who you actually are, and that you've had to willfully make that change
Yeah.
or something. I mean, maybe I don't know enough to talk about it to them, which would be another reason for me not to speak.
Right. And
So,
this goes back to again, this really relates to what we talked about 2 weeks ago and last week, is when we talk about ethics, and this is related to morals and ethics for certain. And it depends on the setting that we're in. You know, if you just happen to, you know, if you're out at the park or something and you just come across someone who, you know, you start talking with, and it comes out in that conversation, in that setting, oh, they're, you know, they identify as a squirrel. Well, you know, at that point, even though it may not be truthful for me to acknowledge their squirrelness, right? I look at it as, what's the worst thing that could happen, you know, if I agree with them? Well, the worst thing that's going to happen is, you know, I'm gonna feel like a little bit of a toad, you know, but it really don't mean nothing, is the old saying, right? Don't mean nothing. On the other hand, if we're talking about in a professional setting where a code of ethics and standards of practice says you will be affirming that person, then now you've got a moral ethical gap, right? There's a misalignment that we talked about. We hope that there's an alignment between personal morals and professional ethics and the law. But what happens if there's a disagreement? Maybe that professional, in air quotes, doesn't have the opportunity to say, I'm going to pass. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to address it. No, you have to address it. And you have to affirm them, because if our highest standard is to do no harm, and that person claims that they were harmed because we didn't acknowledge their squirrelness, right, or whatever it is they're identifying with, then all of a sudden we've done harm and we could be potentially disciplined. Okay. Now, here's just a further extension of this, okay, where truth is becoming more and more relative and more personal than it ever has, at least in my professional, history. But I remember one time, Fritz Perls, right, was kind of the founder of Gestalt therapy. He was talking about basically acknowledging people for who they are and becoming aware, in this dialogue between the I and the thou. And if the I wants to acknowledge the thou in the other person, and they say, I identify with Napoleon, we say, well, okay, fair enough. You can identify with Napoleon. You can identify with whomever you want. But he says, this is what Pirtle said. He said, but if you say, I am Napoleon, then we call you crazy. Okay. And he does it, in a very confrontive kind of way. No, you are not Napoleon. You are Jake, right? Or you are Sue. And so how we've lost the truth and being able to empathize with somebody's association with something that we may either agree with or disagree with, to all of a sudden now we have to affirm it and agree with it, even if it's not true, because we don't want to harm them. There's something insidious about that and much more damaging. Again, you got somebody that comes in, they identify as a bear. They become much more stoic, whether they know it or not, right? Much more resilient if that's what they're identifying at. But and we can support that and we can encourage it, even though we're not saying, yeah, you are a bear, you are an elephant, you are whatever. But at least we can take the strengths of that and help to encourage them and lift them up, while at the same time saying, hey, it's still you. It's not the animal, right? But to support and encourage someone's delusion, right? In psych terms, it is delusional. If we support that, we then become delusional with them.
Yes.
Which again puts people in the category of, if that's the professional standard, how does that square up with your own morals and your own ethics as your anchor of who you are and what you're about?
Right. And I do think that that's where many of us, maybe in professional fields, but even personal lives, this is where you can lose your anchor.
Yeah.
And I'm not questioning anybody's beliefs here, but what I'm saying is have them and have your anchor.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to have an anchor, you must be willing to hold to it. And it has to be fixed and it has to be unchangeable, because I do believe there's unchangeable truth.
Right.
And for me, that has to be solid for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I have to operate, because I think if I don't operate that, I will do harm.
Yeah.
In my interactions with people, because if I can't give someone a solid answer,
yeah,
that I know is anchored in good rock,
right,
then I am afraid that I'll hurt someone.
Yeah.
In personal conversations or professional. So I do think that thinking about this in Buddhist terms and Stoic terms, I think that that truthfulness that is the rock.
Right.
That's I don't know how you get away from it.
Yeah.
And I think to take that and water it down because we're afraid of hurting people, that's what's hurting them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happens if you let the person believe they're a squirrel and
Right.
everyone else believes that too? Are they going to climb a tree and fall?
I
Are they
know.
going to run out in front of a car? I don't know what the end is. And of course, this is all hypothetical, and I don't know
Yeah.
if the squirrel's made up or not. I think that may be a real person you're talking about. Uh, but uh, but if they are, I don't know what the end is when I just agree with them.
Right.
And and I know we talk about speech, and especially in Buddhist terms, because we talk about the kindness of it.
Yeah.
And he was very clear about it that we should speak words that are gentle, that are soothing to the ear, loving,
Right.
going to the heart, courteous and dear, and
Yeah.
that are agreeable to many, he
Yeah.
said.
Right.
He didn't say agreeable to all,
Right.
agreeable to many. And I
Yeah.
think the reason why that is there is because you can't be agreeable to all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can say things to a person who believes something inaccurately about themselves that is agreeable. You can say things like, I love you, whoever you are.
Hmm. Hmm.
I embrace you. I support you in your journey to find out who you are. I'll help you. I'll do what you need. I'll feed you. I mean, there are things that I am willing to say to a person like that. I'll help
Right.
you find the truth. It's a hard path. I'll walk with you, whatever it might be. There's lots of things that I can say that are kind, but
Yeah.
I don't know that saying, I agree that you're a squirrel and I'm going to help you be a squirrel
Yeah.
is kindness.
No. No, I
And
agree.
to me, it's not because, and let me give you another point, and I'll exaggerate it too, um, because I think about this kindness with Buddhist speech all the time. But let's say my brother-in-law is a heavy alcoholic,
Yeah.
and his family is falling apart because of it.
Mhm.
He needs to stop. As a person who would practice speech according to the Buddha, I have to tell him that.
Yeah.
That's the only kind thing to do. And
Right.
that conversation, I guarantee you, will not sound kind.
Yeah. Right.
But the kindness in that conversation has to do with the fact that I'm giving him a pathway to freedom.
Yeah.
So maybe we're looking at this, maybe we're skirting around the issue, actually, because maybe we need to look at all these situations when people are delusional and rethink about the fact that kindness is showing them a pathway to freedom,
It sure is. That's right.
and and not just agreeing.
Yeah.
But if I know that someone is on a pathway that is really going to hurt them in the long run, my obligation, this is, I think about it like this, because that's why I say my brother-in-law. By the way, it's not true. I don't have a brother-in-law that does that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but uh, but if I did, I would. But I always think about it like this. I have to think about it in those personal terms, because what if it's a family member? How would I act?
Right.
Okay, well, that's how I should act to all people,
Yeah.
because my love should extend to fellow men.
Right.
I mean, it should extend to the other humans who I share this planet with. And so, if I'm made aware of this, and especially in the scenario you proposed,
Hmm.
that I'm walking in a park and somebody approaches me and says that,
Hmm.
I don't know that I can pass by it now that I think about it, Trace.
Right.
And especially
Yeah.
the more, maybe we need to go to Stoicism, because the more I think about what the Buddha actually said, and even when he talks so specifically about being kind,
Yeah.
I think it's the kindness one that really gets me.
Right.
Because if kindness kindness does not mean speaking softly
Yeah.
and sweetly. Kindness means giving you a pathway to liberation
Mhm.
or realization is what he would have said.
Mhm.
So is that squirrel on the pathway to enlightenment?
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
That-
not if I leave them there.
Right.
Uh, so kindness demands then that I take action.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I can fix anything. It just means that I have the responsibility to speak.
Yeah.
So maybe that's yeah. We better move on to someone else because now I feel compelled to go to the park.
Well, and I'm kind of thinking about that too. If nobody likes, again, you go back to if it's in a professional setting, okay, more constraints, the parameters are a little better defined. But if it's somebody that's either a family member or it's an associate or it's somebody that you meet out there at the park, then it does. It becomes it becomes a little more of how much, how much do I really want to invest in this? Because if you're only going to have a conversation with somebody over the course of 15 minutes at a park, that's one thing. I may not have anything invested in it. And I probably should have more invested, but it's not like somebody came to me and said, hey, I've got a conflict because I really identify as a squirrel, but I'm not sure that I am. Can you help me? Right? Well, that becomes different. Then it's a solicitation. But if I go out there and if I just solicit my observations after hearing this person is a squirrel, I don't know. That might go over a boundary that I might not want to step over because once you do that and then you don't come back and affirm that, now all of a sudden you've got a potential power struggle at best, right? Even if it's just, hey, we're going to have to agree to disagree. I'm pressing on with my run, and you go on about your own way. But it still leaves two people in a state of incongruence. It doesn't feel good, you know, because then you're going off one direction, having bad feelings. The other person's going off feeling hurt, maybe, and having bad feelings. So knowing which fights to take on and which ones to show the wisdom, hey, I need to take this on because it's the right thing to do. Truth needs to be heard. But I don't think we have to take on every one of those fights that come along. You know, and sometimes the fights are even within and among ourselves. I'm going to hold up something here because I knew that there was something missing from our conversations. So in the
Sure.
past, when we're at the coffee shop, and now we have our other seeker brothers and sisters out there, we got to have our coffee mug.
I'll
But
make
this
sure I
one,
have it next time.
yeah, well, see,
I,
this one I really brought out for two reasons. One of them is in honor of your interest in stringed instruments. And you also know that for a time I did shigoyo or a shugyo for sustained practice of practicing the guitar every day for a year.
yes,
Okay.
I
And,
know.
and if you remember, I went into that with the expectation of no expectation. It was simply a sustained practice to show that I could play the guitar, practice the guitar every day for 365 days. No expectation of being better. Well, at the end of that 365 days, I wasn't disappointed. I clearly was not any better, right? And after all of these years of picking up the guitar, putting it down, picking it up, putting it down, I finally had to become truthful with myself, right? And to be kind to myself and realize I have zero skills, zero talent when it comes to playing the guitar. So this is the only thing that I have left that relates to guitars.
Okay.
I sold the other ones.
Good
And,
for you.
yeah, and so see, I'm gonna implicate you and Rose and everybody else in this thing, and I'm gonna say if you all had just been truthful with me and said, you know what, you try real hard, but you ain't got any talent, Jack,
Well, it's not true, but
right? So would have saved me a whole lot of pain and suffering and all.
well,
But
I'll tell you what, though. But the pain and suffering did pay off,
it did,
because how many people do you know that did made a commitment to do something for 365 days that actually did it?
right?
And what that means is, let's say you decide to do something else for that, you already know you can do that.
Yep, yep, that's exactly right.
So, I mean, that's actually a pretty big deal, and I was quite impressed with it. And I'm pretty sure that, well, the thing about playing a musical instrument, and I think most of us, this is really off topic, but here's the truth about it. If you want to know the truth about it,
Yep.
most of us that play, there's a lot of good players, lots of them, thousands, millions. I don't know. There's lots of good players. But I think when we're kids, we see guitar players playing in the media or whatever, and we think, oh, that's going to be me.
Yeah,
Well, that's the wrong approach, because music is not about being the one that's on TV. It's really being about the one who sits in this house and fiddles with the ukulele and is happy because he hears the sound.
right.
And that is all there is to it. And if somebody else happens to hear him playing it and they are comforted or smile or feel warm because they heard that same tone, then that's just a benefit. But you know what? I think I knew that when I was a kid, because and I think any parent that's had a kid learn an instrument recognizes this, because it's torture to listen to somebody practice,
Yeah,
especially a loud instrument. But in that kid's head, he already hears the song
hmm,
in full, and he's just practicing. And he
yep,
hears the whole song. To everybody else, it sounds horrible, but to him, he hears it.
yeah,
Well, I think that's the beauty of it, because that's, if you, once you get to that point, you already enjoy it.
yep.
And if that's
Yeah,
all a person ever does, then they can pick up their instrument and enjoy it if they want to. But I think we tell people the wrong things about learning instruments.
right.
We tell them. And I also think that we should stick something in a kid's hand when they're born and say, play this.
Yeah,
Give them a dadgum harmonica.
right.
There's, 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 it's just not rocket science. There's only 10 notes in a scale. I
Yeah,
mean, come on, just give them something to play. And it's kind of like, I think music's like art. I think we're born musicians, but they teach it out of us.
right,
And then when
right.
we go back and try to learn, we knew how to drum when we were infants,
Yeah, yeah.
but
It,
they tell us not to when we're at school.
right.
I
And
used to
and
drum with my
again,
dad.
going along with this, I tell you what, I'm as much of a proponent of encouraging people as anybody. That's my story. I'm sticking with it. But I really do. I love encouraging people. And if somebody says, "Hey, I want to learn to play the guitar," for example, or they want to learn to become whatever, and they pick up that instrument or that paintbrush, whatever, and they realize they are unconsciously incompetent, because at that beginning stage sometimes people will throw something out there, like I don't even want to say Hunter Biden, but you throw something out there, and then all of a sudden, oh, this is a masterpiece. Well, you have to then go to the next level where you are consciously incompetent, where you realize what you've done there hurts the ears of the listeners, right? It's painful to look at, but you realize that that's part of self-awareness, but a person can't come in and do their first strum on the guitar and it sounds terrible. And then they say, on the one hand, I'm going to play like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Okay, great. Let's go. I will listen. Right? But if somebody comes in and says, I am Stevie Ray Vaughan, there's something crazy about that.
That's right.
And I'm certainly not, in that situation, going to affirm and reaffirm and support and encourage that mindset. It's
No.
it's distorted from the truth. It takes the encouragement and it distorts it into something that I have to buy into that is a lie.
It's real delusion.
Real delusion, right?
And,
Yep.
and not, I think I think when we suffer the delusion and we support it, and then it somehow becomes a reality for that person, they're headed for some problems with that issue.
Yeah.
But what I don't have a problem with is with somebody that comes in and says, I want to be Stevie Ray Vaughan. I want to look like him. I'm willing to do anything to be just like him.
Yeah.
Okay, I still think that's nuts. But yeah, as long as you know that you're not,
Yeah. Right.
as long as you're not trying to convince me that you are,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that, because you're talking about that's being rational. You're saying I'm not him, but I want to look like him, play like him. I want to be him in the appearance in any other way
Yeah.
I can. I know that
Right.
I'll never be him. That's different
Yeah.
than believing that you are him. And I don't think the God delusion is any different.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
really, when someone says, "Yes, I'm God,"
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and not someone that said, and I'm not talking about someone that says, "I was made in the image of God,"
Right.
so, or I'm just a drop in that ocean of God. I'm not talking about that spiritual sense.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the person that shows up and says, "No, I'm Jesus Christ. I came back.
Yeah. Right.
And that's who I am." Well,
Yeah.
that's a God delusion, and that's obviously not who they are.
Right.
And to support that is problematic.
Yeah.
So,
Randy, just along that line, what I'm thinking about right now is who is the actor that played Elvis in the movie?
oh, I
Uh,
don't know, but he was good.
he was good.
Oh
Okay,
yeah,
and
and
so if
he got close.
that's it. And so the amount of time and effort that actor had to put into studying Elvis Presley, and then Tom Hanks, I think Tom Hanks, wasn't he the one that played, whatever, the general or whatever,
Yeah,
let's say.
yeah, the
So
Colonel.
yeah, the colonel. Yeah, the colonel, right. I gave him a promotion. That's
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. So so that amount of time that a person that is an actor has to put into immersing themselves into a character, they become, for that temporary amount of time, so immersed in it that they become that person. They have to, because that's their job when they get in front of the camera. Right. But to me now, I don't know any actors, so I don't know how long it would take them to come out of character. But my sense is they don't stay in that, saying, because I was able to play that part so well and everybody believed it, that I am Elvis.
right.
That would be crazy, and it would be crazy on the part of the audience, right? To buy into that. But
Yeah,
yet we generalize, we extrapolate across settings where it makes no sense in one setting, but we're trying to make it sense from it in another setting.
yeah.
You know?
By the way, there's been some really good ones that have done that.
Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix, right? What?
Right.
Who was he?
What, Johnny Cash was
Johnny
there?
Cash.
Yeah.
Gary Busey was Buddy Holly.
Buddy Holly. Okay. Yep.
And I swear, when you listen to the him sing Buddy Holly songs, he sounds just like him.
Yeah.
I mean, so, but you're right. But I do think sometimes those actors have a difficult time, even because they immerse themselves so much into it.
Yeah.
They have a hard time coming back to reality.
Right.
But they do that intentionally.
Yep.
They know they're not.
Yep. It's their
They're
job.
doing that. They're doing it intentionally, and they're immersing themselves in everything they can possibly find out about the individual.
Yeah.
Their mannerisms. They're watching film of them. They're doing everything they can to mimic them.
Right.
They know in the back of their head they're mimicking
Yeah. Yeah.
that. So I guess the honest truth is the mimicry, and you know that.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting topic, Trace. And when we said we were going to talk about right speech, it's not really something I thought that we would approach, but it's very interesting when you apply it to this kind of setting.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to apply right speech to practically any other setting.
Yeah. That's right.
Be honest with you, but you know what? Maybe we don't need to talk about that in a podcast because those things are easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, don't lie.
Right.
It's also easy not to lie.
Mhm.
It's a choice
Yeah.
not to lie. And I
Right.
do think that that's easy.
Yeah.
Now, putting it in practice, maybe that's not so easy, but
Yeah.
it is easy not to lie because it's a simple choice. But
Right.
when you put it in the context of something else, like you've brought up, then you really put it to a test because then you see where you really are pushed as a human to violate any principles you might operate by
Yeah.
because you're under such societal pressures to do so. And I'm thinking about you were talking about in a professional setting because I was referring to, yes, if I'm in the park and that happens to me, but if
Yeah.
I'm in my office at the university and a student comes to me and gives me the same scenario, my response has to be different. My response can professionally be, I'm not sure how that's going to play out with you wanting to be a teacher. That could be an appropriate response. You may want to think about whether this works for you and how that works with your career choice.
Right.
But in no way would I be allowed to say, you can't be that. You can't be a squirrel.
No.
No, I am bound by my professionalism to only advise them about whether or not they're an appropriate match to be within my field of study.
Right.
And that I'm not allowed to go beyond that, actually.
Yeah.
I violate many of our policies if I do.
Yeah.
And I don't need to either in that setting for that decision. If I want to help somebody, that's a different story, but I don't need to in that setting for that decision.
We talked about choice one other time. Maybe it was, I don't even remember now, even though this is only our sixth episode, I've lost track, right? But somewhere in there, we talked about human potential, right? And a lot of people say you can be anything you want to be, you can do anything you want to do. And I brought up something from Adlerian therapy that said we have freedom within limits. Like, for example, even though I might say I am a professional jockey, horse jockey, I'm
Yes.
not going to be because I'm too big. Even though I'm not that big, I'm too big to be a jockey, right? There are some practical limitations, but we do have so many choices that we can make. We have freedom, whether we have freedom within limits or not, let's just pretend we do. But then once we get down to, all right, I've got a choice between two alternatives, even if we call them an approach conflict, where we have two equally desirable options, but I have to pick one. And so let's just say that we're talking to that person who says, I'm not just identifying with squirrels because I like them, right? I am a squirrel, then to me, part of our responsibility in being truthful is to follow something that I have on my whiteboard over here that doesn't mean anything, but it means something to me. And it says, just decide. That's exactly what we've been talking about. But once I decide on a particular choice, I'm going down path A as opposed to path B, then I've got to think through what are the potential consequences of that choice? Because now I've decided. And if I put it out there, I'm going to do this, then if I don't do it, there's if nothing else, there's a perception of flakiness, right? But part of our responsibility, let's say in a professional or even in a coaching scenario, is if somebody says, I have decided I am this, even though we know that they're not, then I think we have to be truthful and say, hey, look, let's look at some of the options that will be closed to you because you've chosen that particular pathway, right? If you say, I am a squirrel, and whatever the job is, let's say you want to go into, has some kind of psychological evaluation attached to it, or if you want to try to get a top secret security clearance, in the military, I don't think that's going to happen unless the entire assessment process changes, where it's okay now to be a squirrel in a nuclear ICBM site, right? I don't see that happen anytime soon. Now, granted, I don't think a squirrel would want to be a missile combat crew commander, right? But a squirrel might want to be a teacher, might want to be a professor. And how does that all shake out for them? Well, we don't have the answer, but we have the answer based on what we know right now, and it probably wouldn't go well. At least if you've got an interview committee that's making a decision, because for every one person that says, "Yeah, you are a squirrel," there's probably going to be four others that say, "No, you're both delusional," right? So I don't, and we can say it in love, but still be truthful with people. That's where I think that the Stoics. In fact, I wrote something down with them. One of the cornerstones of Stoicism is about self-control and fortitude as a means of overcoming destructive emotions. So we know a lot of people that are dealing with anxiety kind of disorders and anxiety feelings. They can really benefit from studying Stoics. I mean, if we don't like the notion of pulling yourself up with your bootstraps, well, then maybe you don't want to study Stoicism. But it's a lot of that, you've got that wisdom, you've got the strength within you to overcome whatever comes your way, as long as you feel like you have some control over it, right? And our speech clearly is one that we do have control over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually, as I kind of thought about, as mentioned earlier, I kind of thought about Stoicism being in the middle between Buddhism and
Right.
the more I think about it, uh, I find some comfort in the philosophy of Stoicism. I find some security in it. It may be a better way to say it. In particular, some of the best parts of the philosophy or that advice is how it talks about how we should talk to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly bad about this because I'm an agreeable person.
Hmm.
I'm likable. I want to fit in.
Yeah.
But I like the instruction about not using self-deprecating humor
Yeah.
and not saying those things about yourselves to yourself or to anyone else.
Right.
Uh, I think that's wise advice.
Yeah.
Why would you ever admit or say, verbalize to anyone that you're less than who you are?
Yeah. Yeah.
I, I, I understand that it's totally fair. It's totally fair. And I mentioned to you, the plumbers are working out in the other house
Right.
today.
Yep.
It's totally fair for me to tell that plumber that he knows everything there is to know about that, and I know nothing,
Yeah.
because that's true. Um, but I know a lot of stuff that he doesn't know.
Yeah. That's right.
He knows a lot of stuff I don't know.
Yep.
But I don't need to be self-deprecating to make that admission.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay to be honest. It's not to say that, oh, well, I'm just a stupid old guy and I don't know anything. I'm
Yeah.
just an old professor.
Right. Right.
I'm not just anything.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a pretty good professor.
Yeah. No
Pretty
question.
good, maybe uh, putting too much limits on it. And so are you, Trace.
Yeah.
You know, and I like that whole idea about that. Stop speaking to yourself that way
Yeah.
and stop speaking to others that way about yourself.
Right.
It's not fair. And I got to tell you something, Trace, that I remembered when I was thinking about this. You remember the old, from behavioral concepts, grandma's rule?
Grandma's rule.
We always talk about it as grandma's rule. And what it means is this: you take a high likelihood behavior
Yeah.
and you pair it with a low likelihood behavior.
Right.
So, like for instance, a high likelihood behavior would be you want to go outside and ride your bike.
Yeah.
A low likelihood behavior is for you to clean your room.
Yeah. Right.
So you make riding your bike dependent on cleaning your room. That's grandma's room or
Right.
grandma's rule.
Right.
You clean your room and then you can go out and ride your bike.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I heard this from Dr. Richard Fox a long time ago, who's an applied behavior analyst. And I think he may be retired long by now, but I remember him saying this in class ages ago. He said, I don't know if he did this or somebody else did this, but they had a kid that had really low self-esteem. And he was constantly saying things about himself that were bad
Yeah.
out loud to himself and internally to himself. So they decided to use grandma's rule with him. So they gave him a set of cards, those old white cards.
Yep.
And they wrote down on them positive affirmation statements.
Yep.
And here's what the rule was. Every time he had to go pee, he had to read one of those cards first. So they took a high likelihood behavior and made it dependent on him reading a positive affirmation first.
Yep.
So they said they'd find him in the bathroom reading a card that
Yeah.
I'm a great person, I'm really smart, and then he could go to the bathroom. And I thought about this at the time when I remember him saying that, and I thought that's a silly thing, except that it forced this kid into a behavioral pattern where he began to say things positive about himself.
Yeah.
And it's not unlike what the Stoic philosophers talk about.
Yep. Agreed.
Stop doing that. And I
Yeah.
think I found that more enlightening than anything else about them. I love the honesty part.
Right.
But it made me think about how often I do that to make everyone comfortable in a room,
Yep. Gotcha. Yep.
to make everybody feel like they can talk.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm doing that I'm sacrificing myself to
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
When did it become my responsibility to become sacrificial?
Yeah.
And why can't I find another strategy that doesn't require me to fillet myself?
Yep.
I think I need to. And I
Yeah.
think I'm going to after thinking about that this week, because I think that is harmful. I don't believe it about myself when I say it.
Right. Yeah.
That's not it. I don't believe it in the core. But you know what? How many times do you have to say something before it becomes a reality?
Right.
And this is where then that springboards off into the last thing that we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
You know, if we speak things into existence, literally,
Yep.
then what am I doing to myself?
Right.
What does the law of attraction really have to say about me using self-deprecating humor?
Yep. No kidding. No kidding. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I got to quit doing this because I start talking about, well, my brain's just slipping because I'm getting older.
Yeah.
Am I just inviting that in?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that sure sounds like an invitation to me. If that's a thing that can be invited, I've sure invited it.
Yeah.
And I believe enough in vampires to know that you don't invite them across the threshold of your door.
Yeah.
So, Trace, anyway, I wanted to mention that I love that about Stoicism.
I totally agree with you. And there's part of self-awareness, right? And realizing, how we're going to spend the finite amount of time that we've got. I think there's the wisdom comes in saying, okay, look, I'm interested in one thing, right? Because so I'm learning from you. So when I talked about, the guitars, that was something I did that for that 1 year and then beyond a little bit dabbling in. But if I come to a conclusion that it's not just about, well, I'm not really improving anymore. It's about having the self-awareness to say, why am I not improving? Right? And well, maybe one of the reasons that I'm not improving is because the people that are improving, music is a part of their life. They are listening to music all the time. I love blues, but I don't listen to it all the time. And frankly, the emotions that would put me into a mindset, right, of being able to express through the guitar the blues that I have felt in the past, I don't really want to go back and relive that. That for
Right.
me is my past. And there's really nothing right now that says, the opportunity cost of putting in more time with the guitar is for me too great. It's not that I couldn't do it if I wanted to, kind of like that 3 feet from gold, kind of story. The
Yeah.
miner went, and got 3 feet and quit, and said it's not there. And okay. So you've got to really want something bad enough to persist through the pain and the suffering that comes along with learning to get to that point where you are consciously competent and then ultimately unconsciously competent. You know, so if people will just kind of hold on to that too and say, hey, look, if I failed at something in the past, whether it was starting the guitar and leaving it or starting graduate school and leaving it, it wasn't that they couldn't have done it. They just saw the opportunity cost as too great and what they would sacrifice from doing something else that's more meaningful. Would you agree on that?
I do agree.
Yeah. And
And
and so
yeah,
yeah.
there's countless things that I've done just like that.
Yep. Yep.
And maybe I've left them to the side. Um, maybe because it was because it costs too much in
Yeah.
time, effort, but sometimes I just didn't find it enjoyable either.
Yeah. Right.
So it didn't match with my spirit.
Yeah.
So why am I wasting my time?
That's it.
If it's not going to make me happy, if it doesn't bring me happy in those moments, then that's a waste of time because I know things that do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And
why not?
yeah, that's right. And really, when you think about that too, that becomes what we do is something that should be paired with who we are. So if we think about a job, a career, a profession, a calling, if we look at it in those terms, part of that being truthful and using right speech with ourselves is about saying, where am I really being called to? What would I do? We always heard this in the past, is whatever it is that you're doing, if you would do it without getting paid for it, that's probably your calling. Then you just have to figure out how it can be monetized, you know.
Yes.
But what we do, we're doing this. This is not monetized in any way. And if we look at it realistically, even if we were to say this is the greatest podcast on the planet, well, we know it ain't, right? This is the sixth week that we've been doing this. We can get better, but being able to say we're doing this because we love teaching, we love having the conversation, the dialogue about thinking, engaging in the art of wondering, and at that point, this hour or hour and a half, whatever the time is, it is inherently meaningful because it's part of who you are as an individual, who I am as an individual, and who we are collectively. And we're trying to see, are there other people out there in in zona noetica, right? In noetic sphere, if some of those people are out there that are like-minded too and want to be part of this with us.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm doing this because it's fun,
Yep.
enjoyable, and I enjoy my friend. To me, we live in different towns now.
Yep.
We don't get to work together like we used to. We
Right.
don't get to have coffee as often as we should.
Right.
Um, so to me, this is like sitting down having coffee with my friend.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that we don't have to script something to say. I
Yep.
love the fact that you can surprise me with where you're headed with a conversation, and I can surprise you,
Yep.
because that's the way we did in person too.
Right.
We
Yep.
just went and had coffee. You never knew where the conversation might wind up.
Right.
I mean, we just say we're going to talk about something, and let's talk about it. And
Yep.
so that to me, it doesn't have to be the best in the world. I don't care. To me,
Nope.
this is being with my friend,
Yeah.
and I hope that there are other people that are our friends or like-minded that will join with us and come and talk about similar issues or other issues that we're fascinated and want to talk about.
Yeah.
And which could be anything
Right.
practically,
Yep.
because that's what nomads of the Noetic are looking for.
Well, amen to that. Right.
We want to explore it all.
Yep.
So,
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm good with us ending on that note because that's a good one.
me too.
All
It was
right.
good conversation, and who knows where this will lead next time. But I'm glad we had coffee together, and next week I'll have my coffee cup with me, and it'll say Hafa Adi.
Oh yeah, from Guam.
That's right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
Well, maybe in one of these other podcast episodes, we can talk about the traditional healers, the
I,
Sarahanas, and
I would love that,
yeah, that'll
because
be
we have a curandero, famous one right down the road from here. And so, yeah, let's do that sometime. Sounds
yeah,
great.
that'd be fun. All right,
All
we'll see
right.
you later. We'll
All
see you.
right. Many blessings
All right. Take care.
to you.